So I just want to go through, as I said, the brand and immersive guidelines, but just a quick note about me. This is what I think I look like in virtual reality. I've been innovation manager at TAFE Digital, but I've got a background in animation, so I was lucky enough to work at Autodesk for 5 years and jumped into Immersive about 5 years ago. And I'm a proud founder of 2 failed startups, so I haven't just been in corporate, I've failed as well. So just a quick thing on our digital lab. TAFE's actually the largest vocational trainer in the Southern Hemisphere. We've got 500,000 students, 136 campuses, and we've got an innovation team, learning design team, which is made up of the innovation team, which is the group that I lead. Our focus is 3 to 5 years out. We look into immersive technology, machine learning and artificial intelligence. The learning tech team is looking at the more current technologies that are coming to the market around ed tech and design tools, etc. And then we've got an analytics team which look at the big data and helping us make sure we're doing the right thing. So this is a really good slide, and I like to scare marketers in particular around this slide. This is the Pepsi Sign. It's actually a landmark in Queens. It's been around since 1940. And in augmented reality, you can pretty much define what your brand experience is. So, you know, PepsiCo would imagine being not very happy with that experience. But at the moment, you've got those users dictating how they want to engage with those digital assets in the world. And they're able to change the journey for the brand or how they see things around them. So looking into the 5 pillars of immersion, these are the areas I'll cover. There's probably fundamentally areas I identified in regards to building both brand guidelines as well as UX and UI guidelines. And those are visual cues, interaction design, spatial design, oral design, and emotional. So looking at the first one, visual. It's a really interesting experience, and I've done this twice. I was at 3M before I was at TAFE, and both times I've come to the organisation and says, do you guys have a 3D logo? And they're like, why would we need a 3D logo? So I've actually had to work with the team, and we're building out what our 3D logo looks like. But it's not just about the visual aspect of the 3D logo, but it's also, can I put my head through the A? Can I, see it from behind? How does the digital asset actually of the brand be engaged with in both the augmented and virtual reality? So all of those questions need to be asked, and they aren't being, to be honest. At the moment, most brands are playing around with the technology of augmented and virtual reality. They're seeing the fun of the tech, but they're not actually thinking about what is the story my brand is trying to tell in this space. The other part of it, obviously, you've got these brand guidelines. This is our actual base colour guide for our brand. And yeah, it's probably sitting in a PDF or some other document, but not being paid attention to by the immersive designers as well. So they're going off and doing all these other things which aren't in line with what the corporate brand looks like. What we've done, though, is we've actually made sure, and this is a concept, and I'll show a quick video of this in a second, but this is a concept we built, but we made sure we took all those colours and we're applying the colours that equate to the brand. So you start to get that consistency across traditional media all the way through to immersive technology. And the other part of it is, and this is a great example from Dior, is that every part of the experience is brand. So you can have a headset. This is a custom headset they actually built for the Fashion Week. So you can actually have custom headsets. You can deck out things with the brand and make sure that the entire journey that you're doing is applied. And it's not just, suddenly you're doing a Vive and everything's around the headset. It's a Vive HTC experience. It's not a TAFE experience. So making sure that consistency is common across both the devices as well as the software. So looking into interactions, there's 4 main components that I'd like to focus on. So you've got to think about all these parts. Buttons are really important. It's a really tricky thing, especially, and most of the stuff I'll talk about here is in in virtual reality, but it's as applicable for augmented reality. A really good example with buttons down the bottom is Job Simulator. I'm sure most people have had a go of it, but they did a great concept of actually having a 2-button keyboard because they realised you are using Vive controllers and you're trying to type with a baseball bat. So being able to actually use a single button is a really good way to interact. Menus as well. There's some great stuff coming out of Leap Motion for the AR side, but making sure that you take advantage of the physical nature of virtual reality or augmented reality and not rely on traditional 2D drop-down menus. If I see another iPad in a VR experience, I'm going to scream. don't do it. I mean, there's no point bringing these 2D paradigms into a 3D world. You can put things on your wrist, you can do all these other things, so start to experiment and work with that. Controllers as well, so we're at the moment working out when do we use hands, when do we use actual controllers, technical devices, or when do we actually use tools or other objects to actually interact with the space. So that's a really important thing to set in place early. And also things like button configuration. You don't want to be building a number of experiences and have different buttons for each experience. TAFE's actually got a goal of delivering 50 applications this year in the next 12 months. And I can't have, these 50 applications, all these guys having different buttons or different ways and having to learn each time as you go through these experiences. And the last one's probably the most important. It's probably the one that people don't understand the most, is affordances. So if you put a handle in virtual reality, someone's going to try and grab that handle. Make sure they can interact with it. If they can't, then don't put a handle there. Same with something like a fry pan. You expect to be able to put the fry pan on the stove. I mean, the classic thing is putting things on tables. I mean, you see people in virtual reality headsets actually leaning on a table that doesn't exist and falling on the ground. So you've got to be really careful about those affordances. If you're going to put things in there that are close to reality, make sure that they can interact with them the way they would expect to. The other interesting area you can do with that is called affordance hacking, where you could turn the handle and the room would turn, not the door. So there's some really interesting ideas you can play around with, but definitely if you do have these objects in space, make sure that they act the way they should. So the other part of it is limitations informed design. This is a great experience called virtual reality. And I'll take a lot of cues from the games industry because they do a great job. I mean, this is all 3DOF, so you're not looking at having 6 degrees of freedom to actually move. So because it is restricted, they're using the raycasting device to actually, as sort of a fishing rod effect, to drag themselves through the scene. So you can actually pull yourself through the entire scene using raycasting, but also objects as well. So 3DOF doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a bad experience. You've just got to understand what the limitations are and how can you use them in the design to inform what you're doing. And then contextual interfaces are really important. I mean, the biggest thing for me is that I keep seeing these things where things are popping up over things or not conforming to the actual object. This is the droid repaired by the Star Wars guys, and I mean, it's really great. They've got, a nice handle there, and it pulls out, it glows, and they've got actually the shape of the object and things are glowing to actually understand that it's in a spatial environment, what you should do. You shouldn't have to explain how to work in these spaces. It should be pretty intuitive. And then lastly, lobby interfaces. I mean, if you are going to be using 2D menus, you've still got that ability to make them look quite sexy. This is from the Climb, and it's a really beautiful way to show what a 2D interface could look like. Don't just think about drop-down menus. Don't use mobile sort of drop-downs or website drop-downs as part of your design process. Think about the fact you've got some depth to play with. So going into spatial. So this is the virtual lobby experience that I got my team to build in a week for me, specifically for this talk. What we're looking to do is make sure that the environments that the students are going into are common, so they have a common grounding, and I'll talk a little bit about it in a second. But also, you can see there's no sort of text-based stuff, there's no menus, it's all going to be very intuitive for them to actually interact with. And the reason you want to look at building a lobby or a common area, it's a nice ease in. So if people have their first time in virtual reality, the last thing you want to do, and I've made this mistake, I actually built an experience at 3M where they were 30 stories up. That's the last thing you want to do if someone who's never done VR before, is put them up in a building site 30 stories up and scare the hell out of them, because they'll never do it again. So actually an easy entry is really important, making people feel comfortable. Grounding is also another important part. If you're in a lobby, you're grounded, you know where you are, your orientation is added, and you start to get your VR legs. The consistency, as I mentioned, having a persistent environment is especially desirable for brand. So everyone knows it's going to be a TAFE experience. They know what to expect. They know how the buttons work, etc. And then a home base. As I said, we're looking to launch hopefully 50 experiences in the next 12 months, and we need to have that home base environment where people can jump in and out of experiences quite easily. Looking in locomotion, obviously really important in space. I mean, this is sprint vector, using your arms to run, which is a really interesting paradigm. But I mean, you should really explore the different ways you can actually use locomotion. There's heaps of different ways to do, teleportation and obviously things like this. But just start to experiment. It's really quite surprising where you think things won't work and they do. So, but yeah, I wouldn't just try and rely on teleportation. It's probably the most difficult thing for people to get their head around initially in VR. So if you've got novice users, look at something that's a bit easier, or make sure you're serving stuff around your immediate environment. I mean, as they're going back to the job simulator guys, they actually built everything that was within hand's reach, so they didn't have to use any type of locomotion. But it's really important to start to experiment with these. Don't sort of rely on the stuff that's been done in the past. And then contextual navigation. Instead of having arrows and signs and things like that, make it obvious where the next step they should take or the next progression they need to do. This is the climb. I mean, obviously, people that are experienced with climbing, they understand they've got to look at overhangs and things to grab a hold of. If you can build that into, it just increases the immersion and increases the realism. You're not relying on these sort of arbitrary 2D objects. Now, looking into oral. The power of sound is really important. It's probably the most forgotten thing. If you're looking into spatial sound and actually paying attention to it, it increases immersion considerably. We were at Stanford yesterday and we had a great experience with the audio they've got there, and adding that extra layer is really, really important. Improves navigation, so you can do things in spatial sound where you can have something sound off behind you to make a person turn or explore the area. You can actually alter the Z-waves and emotional state of people. And then with spatial sound, it's personalised for each person. So we can actually have data that'll be able to be customised and personalise the experience as people are going through them. And then the big one, this is the power of voice. Everybody forgets voice. Most of the experience, I'm sort of like, why do I have to have a button when I can just speak to something? So this is an experience that the TAFE actually built for a financial event that we had in Sydney. And what we did is we actually got it was for CEOs and CFOs, and we realised in the HoloLens they weren't going to want to learn how to air tap or do anything because they're CEOs and CFOs. They're just used to saying stuff and things happen. So all of this is voice control. They just yell at it and it basically does what it's told. So it's really important to use that if you can. We're doing another one at the moment with nursing. It's all voice control because, you know, we've got limited time with people at a trade show event. We've got to make them be able to just quickly engage with this content and use the power of voice. Also with this, we understood the limitations of the HoloLens where, you know, you've got a 40-degree field of view, so we made sure we kept everything inside that field of view because people get lost in a HoloLens. If they turn their head and suddenly everything's vanished, they think they've broken it, so they'll freeze. And a CEO doesn't want to look stupid, so we're trying to make sure that they're not doing that. And now moving on to emotional. This is a really interesting statement. It came about actually when we were talking about our design. So you can throw a baby off a roof in VR, but should you be allowed to? And it's a question for us, especially because we're educators and we deal with you know, people under 18. We've got to understand, you know, can I kill a student in virtual reality? Can I scare them? I mean, there's some really compelling emotions you can actually draw from this. So you can actually, you know, engage with people and create awe or empathy, stress, fear, and curiosity. They're definitely areas you want to focus on. But depending upon your brand, you want to be really careful with that. You don't want to, you know, it could be bad if people have you know, they can get PTSD from a virtual experience. So you don't want to induce PSD if it's going to affect your brand negatively. But if it's part of your brand, if you're a horror movie brand, then sure. But yeah, for us, we've actually got to take a really big consideration on how much we can stress our students. We're actually building psychometric testing as some of our first experiences so we can get an understanding and a baseline of how people are interacting with the content, and the feedback we get can then drive the design that we're building. And then looking at cognitive overload's obviously the worst. So this is a great experience called hyperreality, and the guy who actually designed it is now at Leap Motion. But yeah, you don't want to overload the space, and make sure you're paying attention to how people are interacting with that stuff. So this is sort of the breakdown, and we're going through this process with a company called We Discover, which are a UX company, and we realise that, you know, UX designers at the moment don't understand this space, so we've actually engaged with these guys. They're willing to invest time and a team to actually help start to build out this area. But I've dealt with, you know, numerous Fortune 100 companies around the world, and none of them are thinking about the brand guidelines. They're thinking about how they're implementing the technology at the moment, but they're not thinking about things like user constraints. You know, you've also got the physical stuff as well, and the safety, like back, neck and eye strain. So there's all this stuff you've got to take into consideration as you actually start building these experiences, especially if you're a large organisation and you're trying to do things, or even as a small one. You've got to pay attention to what you're doing to people in the space. So just in conclusion, start now, start thinking about it now. anticipate changes. Things are going to change all the time. You know, new headsets come out, new technologies get sort of built. Experiences should evolve, so change things when you can. Don't keep your mistakes. It's probably the biggest one. People get really personal about the stuff that they've built, and they want to sort of make sure these things are out in the market. But if they're not right, like, shut them down and start again. And the last thing is experiment. I mean, you know, we spend all of our time in the lab jumping into headsets, making sure we're spending time in the technology. I mean, even as a manager, you can't be away from the tech. If you're not in the headset, you're not paying attention to what's being done, you're going to make these assumptions that these things are going to work, and they're not going to. Lastly, I'll show a show reel of the work we've done so far. We've only been around since December, so it's been a pretty fast-moving environment. But I'll shoot this now. So this is our minister actually opening the lab in virtual reality. He loves the space. And as you can see, yeah, the boss even gets in the headset. This is a multi-person experience that we built for the launch of the headquarters that we actually just launched as well. And the building and construction experience. And new headsets we're playing with. This is a virtual reality pen by Massless. Thanks a lot.
Are there questions for our speaker? I have one.
Okay. How do you record all of the learning data that's being taken place within the virtual reality environment?
So at the moment, we're in the process of choosing a couple of platforms. So we're actually going to have common universal platforms for the multi-user VR and for mobile AR and VR. So we're going out to tender to identify the platforms. We'll have consistent data, single sign-on, so the students will actually have a single sign-on in each experience. With the mobile application, obviously, they'll have to register as they download that app. And all that data gets fed into our data analytics and machine learning team. And we'll be able to start pulling out trends and identifying that.
Do you do it through like XAPI standards?
At the moment, we're working out how we do it. I mean, the guy behind you, my tech dev, he'll be able to talk to you more about that. But yeah, we can definitely talk about it.
Okay, thank you.
What toolkit you're using for the multiplayer collaborative game?
There's a couple of tools they're playing around at the moment. That was built in the Immerse platform, but we're looking at a number of them at the moment just to see how what performs best. And as I said, we are going out to tender for it as well. So, I mean, I think the most important part of it is that social VR is probably going to be the most powerful thing. So actually having our students working together on collaborative projects is the most powerful experience you can have in virtual reality at the moment.
So while I walk over there, I have another question.
Sure.
About the facilities of your institution. Do you have a classroom with multiple VR?
Yeah, so we've got a number of connected learning centres at the moment. We've got 4 that have been built. We've got another 8 getting built this year. So those all have multi-room scale environments. But we're also looking at everything from mobile all the way through to high end. And definitely the Vive Focus and the Oculus Go are really appealing for us as well because they're more accessible for students.
So we're currently working on our branding guidelines for this type of application. And what, as a tech developer or not, what would you like to see from us in our branding guidelines, which would help you build a better experience closer to our brand?
I guess thinking about having at least sort of diving in and experimenting as much as you can inside the space. I mean, the great thing with the tools that are coming out in the market now is you can actually design inside virtual reality. You could mock up your own what something could look like, a room could look like. And then being really clear about the direction you're trying to go, what the story you have. I mean, it's applying all the common guidelines that you have for traditional media, but understanding, as I said, you know, would your brand kill somebody in virtual reality? Can you answer that question? Can it be really concise? If you say yes or no, it's much easier than saying, oh, we're not sure. You know, the biggest challenge I have is making sure, depending on the side of the organisation, you know, making sure that the guidelines are easy to understand. I mean, we're building our brand guidelines, which they'll be in virtual reality, because the easiest way to articulate it is not a, you know, a PDF or a PowerPoint, but it's actually to have an environment and understand how all these things work. So that's what I'd probably look at is speaking to a developer to actually get them to build that guideline inside VR.